So our next speaker and responder to Ken is a dear friend. And before I begin to introduce him, let me say that once Barry has finished his remarks, we're going to do some Q&A. All three of us will be up here, so be thinking of your questions. And I think that should be a very lively and a very intriguing time. Barry DuVal came with the Virginia Chamber of Commerce in 2010. At the time, they had approximately 1,000 members. Today, they have 26,000, and it is the largest business advocacy group in the state. Barry was actually mayor of Newport News from 1990 to 1996. He began his tenure at the age of 19. Obviously, you'll know that when he comes up here. That was also, Jordan, this isn't a funny crowd tonight. No one's hearing our jokes well. Between 1998 and 2002, he served as Secretary of Commerce and Trade for the Commonwealth. He is married to Cindy, who is a CPA. She's also a teaching director for Community Bible Study. They have 3 grown children, Catherine, Daniel, and Rachel, and spouses, and they're all at that table right there. Thank you for being with us tonight. I have been in a small group with Barry for about 5 years. I know him personally. I know his love for Christ. I know his commitment to the authority of Scripture for his life. He is a renowned and an astute businessman and an encourager of business people. He's strategic in his thinking, and he's very committed to his Lord. I can't think of a better person to be our second speaker tonight. Would you help me, ladies and gentlemen, welcome the CEO of the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, Barry DuVal.
Well, thank you, Buddy, for allowing me to be here and share this time with my family. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here tonight on a Friday night. And it's a pleasure. And Dr. Barnes, thank you for being here. Thank you for writing the book. I noticed that Dr. Barnes pulled his timer out. I'm going to pull mine out. It sort of reminds me, I was raised Independent Baptist, and I took a friend with me once to church when I was a young boy, and my pastor pulled his wristwatch off and put it on the counter in a similar way. And my friend said, so what does that mean? And I said, absolutely nothing. But I actually am going to kind of keep track of time. Buddy told me I could really speak as long as I wanted, but we were starting the panel in 15 minutes. So I was honored to be asked to give this response. When Buddy called me, I said, Buddy, I know Ken, and I had a chance to meet him a year or so ago, and I said, he's got more degrees than a thermostat. He is a very bright individual. He studied business and economics. He's a theologian. He's an economist, and I'm not sure I'm the right person to give that response. I don't have that many degrees. I'm not a theologian. In fact, I'm in the 12-step recovery program as a recovering politician. See, Buddy, they're laughing. They're with me. It's the quality. No. So Buddy said, no, that's exactly, I want you to do this. And I have been in a small group with him and others in the room, and I'm really honored to be here. I think we are some of the most fortunate people on the planet. Those of us who are sitting in this room tonight. And I think we're some of the most fortunate people in the history of mankind, for those of us sitting in this room tonight. We have the privilege of calling ourselves Americans. And we have the honor, in my view, of calling ourselves Virginians. And if you weren't born here, but you moved here, like my son-in-law from England, who married my daughter last year, we're adopting him as well as a Virginian. Virginia has a lot to be proud of. We are the birthplace of democracy. We are the cradle of democracy. It all started right here in Virginia. And we are the envy, even today as a Commonwealth, of many states around this country. We have been nationally ranked as one of the best states to do business. And I regularly have a chance to speak about the economic profile of the Commonwealth. I won't do that tonight. Our unemployment rate is 3.1%. we're moving in the right direction, need to create a few more higher paying jobs, but we're a very blessed Commonwealth. We're seeing the Commonwealth grow right now. And I think it will continue to grow, and I think our best days are ahead as a state. But I would tell you that we really grow in Virginia around economic boundaries. When I was a young mayor, the president of the shipyard invited me to come to his office after about 30 days of being a mayor. I'd never been in the shipyard. I was 30 years old. He said, "Congratulations on being elected mayor. We have 30,000 people employed at the shipyard. Over the next 6 years, we're probably going to lay off 10,000, and we're going to have about 20,000 people by the time I think you finish your political career." And I remember right then thinking, this is a pivotal moment in my life. And I started to read and research and talk to other mayors and form a mayor's group and started saying, look, this isn't a Newport News problem. This is a Hampton Roads problem. And I learned in my 30s that Virginia really grows and prospers around economic boundaries. So for those of us who are in Central Virginia, for those of you who call Central Virginia your home, it's just as important what happens in Richmond as Hanover and Chesterfield and Henrico and Powhatan, because this region's going to grow and prosper together or it's going to fall away together. And this region has all the key elements. Dr. Rosabeth Moss-Kanter, a business professor at Harvard Business School, wrote a book in 1996 called World Class. She studied all the regions in the country that were growing and prospering. They all have a few things in common. They all have transportation that allows people to move back and forth quickly. I mean, Richmond has 2 interstates, multiple rail, internet connectivity, an improving airport. They all have institutions of higher education. In fact, there's no region in America growing and prospering that doesn't have a higher education institution. None. Richmond is blessed with institutions of higher education. This region is blessed. They have high intellectual capacity, which means how many masters and PhDs do you have? This region is blessed with that. And they have a workforce that can produce and manufacture in technical schools. This region is blessed with that. And I would say many other regions have that, but what this region has and what our Commonwealth has that many others do not is pro-business legislators. I see Jimmy Massey here, one of the most outstanding pro-business legislators we've had. Dave Bratton was here earlier. Again, Republicans and Democrats in Virginia, governors on both sides of the aisle, very pro-business. So we're blessed to be a Virginian. We're blessed to be in Virginia, and I think our greatest days are ahead. And I will tell you this about being an American. You know, we are 10 days on the other side of the 17th year where we have recognized the attacks of 9/11. I know where I was on 9/11. Can you think about where you were? Take a minute and think about it. I was driving to Washington, D.C. I got a call from my wife. And she was telling me what was happening as she was watching it on television. I turned around and I drove back to Richmond and I went to my office at the Capitol. I was the Secretary of Commerce and Trade for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I remember watching those buildings. And here's what I remember the most. I remember thinking we are being attacked because of our values. We're being attacked because of our faith. We're being attacked because we're mostly a Christian nation, but we also believe in the freedom of religion. We're being attacked because we defend people in Israel and believe in the Judeo-Christian relationship. We're under attack because of our values. That's why we're under attack. And here's what else I remember. I remember learning what a first responder was. I don't think I'd ever really focused on that term until then. And I remember thinking, as I watched those buildings burning, and I saw what was happening and the hundreds and hundreds of people that were running from those buildings, I remember those people that were running towards the buildings. Do you remember who they were? They were first responders, weren't they? And why were they running towards those buildings? Because they had a heart for the people in those buildings. They had received the technical training to go in there, but they had a heart for those people. And they wanted to go and help those people. They saw the need, and their response was to go help. It's because of what was in their heart to go help. Do you know there were 2,977 people that died that day? 417 were first responders. And I think about how they responded because of what was in their heart. And I'm really encouraged about this book. As Dr. Barnes, and I'll summarize with a couple of points. As Dr. Barnes, if you get, and it's a great book, chapter 13, this is what he says about capitalism, if you don't mind me quoting you. He says, capitalism reflects cultural values. If we want a different kind of capitalism, we need to begin to change the social, political, theological, ethical drivers that have formed our economic system. He goes on to say we cannot do this simply by changing the laws that govern our economic activities. Capitalism can only be changed through the wholesale change of human hearts. Amen to that. That's what they would say in my Baptist church growing up. It's only the wholesale change of human hearts. And I think about that, and I think those first responders, they were trained to go towards the trouble. They were trained to see those in need, and in their hearts was the passion to do it. And I will tell you, while we have a lot of prosperity in Virginia, and especially in Central Virginia, we have a lot of people in need. And we have a lot of communities in need. And that was true when I was mayor. And if we get a chance to talk later, I can tell you a story about how to motivate the faith-based community to make a difference. And with all due respect, I think what's in our heart is really what matters the most to God. And I think when I think about God's creation of mankind, with his foreknowledge of our failures, with his foreknowledge of the fall and my belief in the Bible story, he knew that we would struggle with our humanity. And when I think about the plan of salvation, and with all due respect to the economists in the room, and you've probably heard something along these lines, but if God thought solving man's problems was going to be an economic system, he would have probably sent an economist. If God thought solving man's problems was through further education, he probably would have sent us an educator and a professor. And I think if God thought solving man's problems was a result of our political system, he would have sent us really a politician, right? But our problems really are the same throughout human history. Our problems are problems of the human heart. And so he sent us a Savior. And he sent us a Savior to be the bridge between us and him so that we could have the opportunity as individuals to walk in a new path inspired by God and as a result do his work. And I would just say the application in my life is this. I was very fortunate as a young man to have that faith opportunity presented to me, and I asked for my sins to be forgiven, and I asked God to come into my life. And I think from that point on, God was present in my life. And maybe you've done that, and God is present in your life. But what I realized is that I needed God to be prominent in my life, and I needed him to be more than present. I was pleased that my name was written in the Lamb's Book of Life. I was pleased that on that second coming, I would be taken up to heaven. But really, I needed more than that. I needed God to be prominent in my heart. And by being prominent in my heart, I knew I would ask him who I should marry, and he led me to Cindy. I knew I would ask him what career I should take, and he led me into politics, and thankfully led me out, buddy. But I would tell you, I'm still in the recovery program. And I would check in with God on the big things. And maybe some of you do that. Someone is sick. Someone is in need. Someone needs a job. I would check in with big things. But to me, I need to choose every day for God to be preeminent in my life. That's what I need to choose. And I need to wake up every day. And because he made me like him, and because he made you like him, he gave you free will. God is free to choose and free to create, just like he's given you freedoms every day. So for me, the application is to choose God every day to be preeminent in my life. And I think if I can do that and others can do that, and especially if we're in a position where we can share our prosperity with those in need, we have a great opportunity to really change our culture. We have an opportunity to make a difference in our workplace. We have an opportunity to show his love through us to others. And I think it's one life at a time. I think it's one person at a time. And then God uses those people and he puts them in position. And as a result, we have an opportunity to transform a person, a family, a community, a company, and people's lives. And I think if we would follow the path of putting God as preeminent in our lives and preeminent in our heart, then our response to the human need will be his response. And we can talk more about that. But working together with his help will create a brighter future for the people of this region and Virginia, and I think America. Thank you for allowing me to be with you tonight.
So we're going to have a couple of runners with microphones. And I know it always takes the first question to get these things going, so somebody needs to be brave. You should have, there you go, right there, guys. So who would ask the first question of our speakers tonight relative to what you've heard or what you may think you heard? And let me see a hand, and we have Jordan over here and Karen over there. So who would like to ask the first question? This is going to be really rich once we get started. Down here, front row, Hader. They're really getting you tonight, man.
So first, I want to thank you guys for coming down here and talking to us. Dr. Barnes, a great speech. Mr. DuVal, thank you for everything you're doing in our community. The question I had was, thinking about the folks who are promulgating the utopian answer or other answers to other systems, is that an indication of a desire to try to redeem capitalism without an understanding of maybe Christ or what the issues are? And if so, is it not happening because the church is not providing an adequate answer and giving something that's appealing? And if that's the case, I know there's multiple layered, what can we do in the Richmond business community to provide that answer?
Great question. Great question. I say in the book that we defer to regulation and legislation when ethics fail. And I think one of the reasons why ethics are failing is because the church has been asleep at the switch. We have really not accepted the mantle of responsibility that belongs to us as the guardians of these ethical principles. When we talk about the virtues, the church didn't invent the virtues, but we have been the guardians of them here in the West for centuries. And I think we have forgotten that an important part of our ministry is to teach that. And the first part of your question, why do I think people seek utopian solutions? I think they seek utopian solutions primarily because they want a quick fix to a slow problem. And as I mentioned in the book, I have a whole chapter on Karl Marx. I think I'm very fair to Marx because what Marx observed was horrifying. And he tried to come up with a solution. But it was a really bad solution because he didn't understand economics. So I think we should respect those people who say, well, let's try something new. But we also need to warn them that the pitfalls and the dangers and the unintended consequences of going down that road is much worse than if we would simply redeem the system we have by changing hearts.
I think just to build on what Dr. Barnes said, if you think about American politics over the many centuries, in the 1960s, President Johnson brought us a war on poverty. Remember that. We started moving towards public housing, public food stamps. I think the United States government began to move into an area where the church should have been. And perhaps because the church wasn't, therefore there was a void, and we began this war on poverty. We still have poverty in America. We have a lot of public housing projects in America. I know as a mayor in Newport News, we had 180,000 people. We had 70,000 households. 7,000 were on public assistance, 1 out of 10. And we had to go into neighborhoods and actually tear down old, dilapidated public housing and give those people housing vouchers so they can go out and choose where they wanted to live. And as we began to do that, it actually began to reduce some crime. But America's government has had a war on poverty, and in many ways, some of the deficits are a result of American government stepping in and trying to provide food, shelter, clothing, and the like. But clearly, I think there's an opportunity for the church to do more, and the business community through its prosperity, which is still very generous, and many of you in this room I know are extremely generous, but for the broader community to think about how to organize and approach the challenges of the region a little more effectively.
If I could just follow up. Historically, by the way, what you observed is exactly what happened in Europe with Marxism. When did Marx write his book? It was during the Industrial Revolution, and the church was not only absent, the church had colluded with the industrial powers. And that void had to be filled by something. There's an old expression, nature abhors a vacuum. And a vacuum of faith, hope, and love had been created. And Marx filled it, and people went for it. And the damage was devastating.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next question. Hand, please. Back in the back. Jordan? Tim?
Dr. Barnes, I have not read your book. And so with that said, and I did invite my nephew tonight, who is a millennial, who declined. Was Jesus a socialist? Kind of a plant.
Well, since you predicated it by saying you hadn't read the book, I'll give you a pass on that. No, Jesus wasn't a socialist, but he also wasn't a capitalist. And as I explain in the book, these terms, they just lose their meaning when we try to project them onto past eras. They just mean nothing. So when you do get a chance to read the book, and I hope it's soon because you have a copy there, you'll see I trace, if you will, the history of economics and the relationship between religion and economics throughout those various epochs. And while you can't say that Jesus was a socialist or a capitalist or anything else, what you can say is that consistently throughout the Bible, those who have wealth are commanded to use it according to the precepts of God's law and God's will and God's heart. So to whom much is given, much is expected. That you can't escape. But any talk about the Bible says that we should be socialist or capitalist or any other ist is just wrong. Good question, though.
Next person.
Hi, I have a question. Thank you all so much for everything you've said. And Mr. Barnes, I really look forward to reading your book. I'm excited we have a copy here. My question, so forgive me if I misunderstand and please clarify. I'm hearing you say that our country's wealth comes primarily from capitalism and that was built from a moral compass and a moral place. I'm curious what you would say about that in terms of the fact that our country was built on slavery and free and forced labor, and what you would say from a capitalist Christian perspective is the solution for us moving forward in that.
Hopefully both answer this, but let me just say, that slavery was an aberration, and slavery was a very bad economic system, not to mention an immoral system generally, and socially corrosive. When the British outlawed slavery in 1811, do you know who they appealed to in their arguments on the floor of the Parliament? They appealed to Adam Smith. Because the pro-slavery people were saying, take away our slavery and you take away our economics. And they said, no, 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 no. Adam Smith is telling you, if you really want a healthy economic system, everybody who's part of it has got to flourish. And that is the opposite of slavery. So not only is it morally wrong, it's economically stupid. So I don't believe that America was, quote unquote, built on that system. I believe that system held us back several generations. It wasn't until after we ended slavery and the economic system of modern capitalism that I talked about, that Max Weber observed, kicked in, that we really saw wealth creation in the United States. But it's a very good question.
Next, Lee.
Ken, you talked about the first void in the early part of the 20th century. We know that there's a second void coming with a lot of the stuff happening with artificial intelligence. What does that void look like if we don't, as the church, step up and address it?
So I have the privilege of working with Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard Business School on these very questions of what is the impact going to be economically of artificial intelligence and robotics coming together. The general consensus is it will be more disruptive than the first industrial revolution, which is why the politics of this are so important. Because folks, if we stay in our tribes, we're not going to be able to solve these problems. These problems are huge. They are monumental, they are endemic, and they will require all the best brains in the room to figure it out. And it's going to require cooperation between the public sector and the private sector, starting with the church, to figure out how we construct an economic system that doesn't allow artificial intelligence and robotics to become a bad master when they should be a good servant. So the answer to your question is we don't know. We only know that there are a lot of different possibilities coming at us. But I can promise you, if we don't start working together on these things across party lines, we are dooming ourselves, because these problems are much bigger than ideology. Ideology is like a cancer when you're trying to talk about the kind of change and disruption we're facing, in my humble opinion.
Thank you. Lee, next question. It's a good conversation. Let's keep it going. Back in the back, Karen.
Dr. Barnes, thank you, and God bless you all up there. You said cynicism is the biggest threat to I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it's the biggest threat to our way of life right now. What's the first step to eliminate that, to turn that around, if you, in your opinion?
So, what is cynicism? Cynicism is really just a lack of faith in institutions. That's all it is. That's why I talk so much in the book about the requirement for bringing faith back into our discourse. For believers, it starts with faith in God. But even for non-believers, there has to be faith in things bigger than ourselves and things outside ourselves. A lot has been written recently about the post-truth era that we're in, We're in a post-truth era because we're in a post-faith era. People no longer have faith in the source of information, so they just don't believe it. And they defer to conspiracy theories and all kinds of things because they've lost faith in those fundamental institutions that built this country. So that's how we start to change it, is by changing the narrative and saying we need to bring faith back in to the formula. Faith if you're a believer in God, but even if you're not, faith in the things that are fundamental, institutional to our way of life. And that means faith in government, and there's a terrible dearth of that. It means faith in the press, there's a dearth of that. But also, faith in ourselves, and in each other, and in our neighbors. You know, my parents grew up during the Depression, the Great Depression. And they would tell stories about how people came together, people who had nothing, and found a way to be happy. And you know, it reminds me of the fishes and loaves. Because those were little miracles every time those neighbors got together. And that's the kind of thing the church, in my opinion, should be at the vanguard of. We should be modeling that. So that's the way to break cynicism, in my humble opinion.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions. So who would be first of the 2? Gerald.
Thank you. Hi, Dr. Barnes, Mr. DuVal. A question that I have is that how can we make, or at least work towards people being more inclusive? All right. The dilemma that we have in our country, Crystal had spoken on it earlier about slavery. Unfortunately, we had another period. The Reconstruction period was a positive period. And then we went into Jim Crow. And then we went into, and also within that period, you had peonage. All right. And so, unfortunately, historically, our country has not been at least a country that looked favorably towards everybody. All right. And I guess the level of greed that spewed into our country and into our economic system caused, in many instances, people to pit against themselves. All right. And I guess for myself, just moving forward, I mean, there's been a lot of progress in our country, but there's just so much of a divide, okay? The divide of, like you said, you have the wealthy, and then you have the people that are poor, all right? And like you said, everybody's grabbing for straws for a solution, all right? The cost of education is outrageous, all right? There are just so many things now that as a country, we have to work towards trying to pull things together. You know, unfortunately, I guess I'm not in favor of the administration that we have now. I think, unfortunately, we have someone that's driving people apart, pitting people against each other, okay? And in fact, the next person that will take over has a major job in trying to bring us back together. And so I guess I challenge you just with the question of how can we change things, all right? Things that Buddy and I talk about is that we have a more inclusive group. We just look at our group here, okay? If you look at the people that are here that look like me, all right, very few, all right? And so how can we take steps so that we do the right thing in the future? There's so many terrible things that have happened just in the 20th century. The level of exploitation, the level of just people taking advantage of others. How can we as Christians really make a dent to make the difference to really help others? All right? Because there's so much of a problem that we're all dealing with. And so that's why a lot of people struggle with capitalism, socialism. I agree with you. I agree that capitalism is a very positive answer for us all. But how do we work together? How do we do business with each other? All right. How do we do the kinds of things that make it so everybody wins in the total solution?
Thank you. An excellent question, and you make a lot of good points. In the book, I talk about the problem of discrimination and the tragedy of it, not only on social terms and moral terms, but also in economic terms. One of the issues we have, for instance, if you want to look at a practical thing, is access to capital in communities that are regularly blocked from having access to capital. Now, that's something we can change, and it's something that the people in this room can help change. We did a project in Boston through Gordon Conwell Seminary where we raised venture capital to go into the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston and sponsor businesses that were being started by local people in that community who otherwise could not have gotten any capital to start those businesses. And most of those businesses are still operating. This is what I mean when I talk about love. Jesus Christ died for all of us. And if we aren't willing to reach across those aisles, to reach across those boundaries of color and race, religion, let me tell you what, and I say this in the book, what group has suffered the most discrimination in recent years in this country is 51% of the population, women. And the church has been one of the most egregious violators, in my opinion. So we have got to grow up. And we've got to start treating each other the way Jesus Christ treats us. And if we can do that, I believe we can move the needle. And I think we have to.
Just to add to what he was saying, and just maybe from a practical perspective, for what I see is that the business community has responsibility to lead on this issue. And I think an inclusive business community is important. A lot of business people individually get involved in initiatives. The great equalizer, in my view, is education. And what I've seen in the last 10 years is that the business community is focused on early childhood education in a way that I've never seen before. Politically, some of you may know early childhood education used to be sort of a synonym for socialism, and they're going to take over your children and they want to babysit them and control them. But what has really become reality for business people is that they know in order to have a workforce 20 years from now, they have to start with early childhood education. And business leaders across the Commonwealth have come together, formed an early childhood education foundation. Tom is one of the great leaders of that. And they understand the great equalizer will be the opportunity to focus on early childhood education. And I'd love to see the business community do more in that area. Tom, I know I see your head nodding. Thank you for your leadership on that. But many businesses know what product they need to produce. They know how to finance the product. But they don't know where the workforce is going to come from. And I think the economic prosperity and the education will be the most liberating opportunity. So I'd like to see us work with the business community across all communities to make sure they have access to early childhood education. I think 20 years from now, this community will be whatever its workforce allows it to be. And if we don't get that right 20 years from now, this community won't be as prosperous as it is today. So we have to get that right for the next 20 years.
Thank you, gentlemen. One last question, and then we'll have some final comments. Who would ask that? Val? Down here. Val, hold your hand up, please. There you go.
Thank you, gentlemen, for all your wisdom tonight. You've talked about the hope of redeeming capitalism requiring really the reshaping of individuals ethically and perhaps of communities being reshaped ethically. And you haven't spoken at all about the entertainment industry, which is shaping and forming a lot of our nation's ethics, in a sense. I wonder if that's something you've given consideration to and how the church might play a part in that.
So it's a great question, and we in America have allowed our culture to move away from heroes in what traditionally has been fields of heroes, and we often worship entertainers. And if you just look at the economic model, what we pay entertainers based upon what they do to perform compared to what others get paid, it's just a tiered system that represents how much we value entertainers. In return, though, entertainers become opinion leaders. And those entertainers, I don't just mean that produce television, I think it's those that provide athletic entertainment as well, because they're entertainers too. So our athletes, our sports arenas, those who operate in them, and those who play in them, and those who entertain us, are all opinion leaders in our society, maybe in other societies as well. What I would hope the church will do is, and I know there are some churches doing this, and I know there's some Christian leaders in America doing this, is reaching those individuals one person at a time. Because I think it's got to be their hearts changing in order for them to create a message of faith, hope, and love and inclusiveness. But I think that is such a great question, because our entertainers in America do establish the values that we often see lived out throughout all generations. Thank you for the insight.
No, I can't do better than that. Thank you.
Let's thank our panelists, huh?